Hello, I'm Chuck Phillip with South Alabama Home Inspections, and welcome to another edition of Southern Home Talk. And so I figured I would do a video on Fort McDermott. I've lived here all my life. My parents built a house here in '59, and these signs were also dedicated in 1960. And you'll find these signs all through the neighborhood. And so we are at Fort McDermott, and so this has been taken over by the Sons of Confederate Veterans in Mobile, Raphael Sims Camp 11, and they have done a fantastic job of maintaining this property. This used to be all grown up. You couldn't get through this at all prior to them taking over this. And this trail has pretty much remained the same all these years. This trail that I'm walking up has been here since all I can remember, all the way back to the 60s. And I remember back in the early 70s, this was a scout project, an Eagle Scout project, to come and do just what we're doing right here, walking this trail, and they put these markers out. And so you can freeze frame this at any time if you want to kind of read these. And they also put on a reenactment battle every year, and they're real interesting to come and see, and it's filled with history. You can see it's a really steep climb going up this, so wear your hiking shoes. A lot of the roads in this neighborhood are also named from the Civil War battle, and it's also the generals. That was General Murray, General Canby, General Gibson. Confederate Drive, a lot of the streets have Civil War names. And that was a rifle pit right there that was also used during the reenactment. Big old pines. This was relatively clearer than this in the 60s. Hurricane Frederick really did the most destruction to this and made it really, really thick. It's been on fire several times. And this has also filled in more over the decades too. Now, they've done a really good job of maintaining the trails, put garbage cans in here, also utilize those guys if you come up here. Got walkways. Let's see, apparently there was another Eagle Scout project on this as well in 2013. So apparently there'd been more than just one of them. I wished I could remember the scout that was in the 70s. I can't remember who it was. Let's keep on walking. It's good exercise too. Hopefully the wind noise isn't too bad. It is windy. So this is a lot clearer than it used to be. They got park benches out here. You can sit. You can actually see Mobile from here as well. You got dogs in every yard. And also too, guys, I recommend you use these benches and not sit on the ground. There's a lot of red bugs. This is where they actually camp sometimes, I believe, as well. And that was my parents' house back in 1959 when that was built, where I grew up. I used to play back here. Built several forts in the fort. I remember when I would ride my bike through the neighborhood, all the time it seemed like someone would stop me and ask, "Where's the fort?" You know, even had, you know, tourists back in the 60s and 70s that wanted to see this, and I'd point to that sign that we just left back there. Mr. Fuller, Fuller Sr., was getting the same questions too, asking him where the fort is, and he actually got a little bit creative and built this tower looking thing, and which was right in front of his service station and tourist village, and he would point to that. So there it is, it's right outside the door. He had quite the sense of humor. And so it's hard to believe that 157 years ago, this place was alive with action. In fact, the people in Mobile would stand up on their rooftops and could see the battle all the way across the bay. And it could be heard too. And so a lot of people kind of wonder why this was built. And this was not built to protect Spanish Fort. This was actually built to protect Mobile. And back then, the only way the Union troops could get to Mobile was to come up the Blakely River. And so they built this high fortification with Brooks rifles, is what they were called. And they could shoot down onto the river from up here onto those Union vessels. And it's amazing how much digging they had to do to make this. This was actually started in 1864. And the battle here didn't start till 1865. So they were working on these fortifications for a full year. In fact, they hadn't completed them all. These fortifications stretched all through the neighborhood. There's another fort in here called Red Fort. And of course, these are some houses that were also put here in the 50s. Maybe I'll get to a point where I can actually see. You got to watch your footing pretty well because this pine straw is slippery. I'm surprised I haven't fallen yet. Apologize for the wind noise if there's any coming into the camera. I say you can stop this video if you want to read these. And I remember also as a kid, like I say, it was even clearer than what you see here, and also like the moon too, because there's a lot of people with World War II mine detectors out here metal detecting this. I don't think you're going to find much anymore. And so there you can see through the trees. That is the Blakely River down there. And this is the reason why these guns were put here, was to fire down onto that river. And they had a pretty effective range. I think it was a 100-pound shell that could be fired about 3 miles. It was pretty badass. They also had two other island batteries that were further north up the Blakely River called Battery Huger Tracy. Yeah, just amazing how much digging. No backhoes, no bulldozers, just shovels, axes. And they had a lot of trees that were here, but they had cut most all of them down, you know, to create a field of fire view. And so they were a lot of it was corded up. And so you had 2,500 Confederates holding out against around 30,000 Union troops, and the battle lasted 13 days. So it was a hell of a battle, and they really poured it on this hill. Some of the Union gunboats could actually get within range of this, and so they were lobbing in these 10 and 8-inch mortar balls and parrot shells. Like I say, these signs will also give you a little bit more of the history of this as well. So you can pause the video and kind of look at that. I just hope the wind noise isn't too terrible in this camera. But it's a pretty day, and I wanted to come do this. Been wanting to do this for quite some time. And it's either raining, there's always something. So I'm gonna go ahead and chance it today and go ahead and do my version of the walking tour of Fort McDermott. You know, I kind of feel like I can add a little bit more perspective to it growing up here and going back on the memories of what, you know, I've seen this thing transform to over the years. But the main part of this fort is pretty much preserved. And Spanish Fort got its name because it was still on the maps. The old Spanish fort that was built here by the Spanish in the late 1700s. And from what I understand, parts of that was still in place, and the Confederates actually remodeled it to suit their needs. They also believe that the Spanish fort is where I'm actually staring at right now. It's toward the river down there on another bluff. But I'll kind of sort of question that. I'm kind of sort of wondering this could have been it too, and because I don't think they've really found any conclusive evidence that that was the Spanish fort down there, but it could be. And so on the 13th day, this battle pretty much ended, and at nighttime the Confederates that were here, they simply abandoned this position despite the cannons and made their way out of here through a series of footbridges, pretty much the same area where my camera's pointing at, down in that swamp down there below. And I think a good many of them went to Blakely, and the next day or later that next day, that's when the battle for Blakely took place. And so you had General Steele's corps that was camped on Bromley Road, and that was a real short battle. It didn't last long at all. And also Lee, General Lee also surrendered that same day at 4 o'clock. And that pretty much ended. This is pretty much the last major battle of the Civil War, was right here where I'm standing. There were other skirmishes outside of that, or later than this, but pretty much the main Civil War battle was here. The last Civil War major battle. And you can see across those trees, Mobile. And so that's what people were doing back then. They were on their rooftops listening and watching the battle over here. And they actually had communications to Mobile. They had a telegraph wire that went from here to there, so they kind of sort of knew what was going on over here the whole time. I think where, I don't think I captured these. Like I say, if you want to read this, just stop the video and you can read it. There was also a cannon in here called the Cor Slocum, and it remained in the neighborhood until I think the 1880s, and it was eventually brought down to the Confederate Veterans Hall in Mobile, and then stolen from there and taken to New Orleans, where I think it remains today. And if you go to the history page of History of Spanish Fort, Alabama, you'll see photographs of that cannon with the veterans standing around it. That photograph was actually taken in this neighborhood around the 1880s. And so just standing up here looking down, you can see, why this was such a good place to have a fortification. And a lot of the Union troops that were on the ground had their fortifications pretty much where the Spanish Fort Elementary School is on 225. That was one of the primary Union lines, was right there. And I think they made contact with the first Union troops at D'Olive Creek, where the scenic overlook is. If you was to go there and look down onto the creek down below that, which is D'Olive's Creek, I think that's where they first made contact. General Canby's Corps came from Fort Morgan. That's where they came, and they split up. And General Steele, of course, split one way, and General Canby came down pretty much down the eastern shore through Fish River. They had a heck of a time making it down here because there wasn't really good roads. They lost a lot of equipment doing it. General Steele had issues doing his maneuver the way he did it. And just know that at Fort Gaines and Fort Morgan, those forts fell the year before this battle took place. And so it's a full year after that before they actually put operations onto this up here. Well, all right, guys, I think I've told you about all I can. I'm sure I've forgotten some things. If you really want to know in great detail everything that happened here, there's a book called The Campaign of Mobile. It's one of the best books out there, if not the best, on what happened here on a daily basis. And I've read that book several times. I wished I could remember more of it, even though I've read it several times. But if you really want to know the full details, it's about as good as it gets. In fact, I think the book was written the year after the Civil War. I think it was written in 1866, but it's basically a compilation of the records. They kept pretty good records back then. And so, yeah, this kind of sort of brings back, some of the childhood memories I've had here as well. We used to camp back here too, and like I said earlier, had our own little forts we built, a fort within the fort. Well, thanks for taking the time to watch this, guys. I hope this has been somewhat informative. That's what I try to do with my videos, is try to make them as informative as I possibly can. And I may do a follow-up to this, to another area in this neighborhood. If you get in this area, just drive on through this. You'll see the historical markers placed all throughout the neighborhood. There was some big ceremonies on the placement of those, and those are also on the History of Spanish Fort, Alabama Facebook page if you want to take a look at them. Thanks, guys, and take care. Cool.
Make
All right, well, what we're looking at is some of the bullets that were used in the Battle of Spanish Fort in April 1865. So these bullets are well over 150 years old, and they're also white in color too. And the reason that is because of being buried in the ground for over 150 years. That's pretty much just lead oxide on the outside of it, and that's why I have gloves on, because lead is somewhat of a hazardous substance. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and start from the left. You'll see this bullet has like a washer on the back of it. That's called a Williams cleaner. And they had 3 different variants of this. This was the latest one. It's called a Williams cleaner type 3. And every 10 rounds, they would fire one of these, or supposed to, and that would help clean the lead fouling and powder foulings out of the barrel. The one next to it is just your standard 58 caliber mini ball. It's got a hollow cavity on the bottom of it, and the way this worked, it had a paper cartridge tied to it. The paper contained black powder, and they would cram that down the barrel with a rod, fire the gun, and when they fired it, the explosive force would cause this bottom to flare out and catch the rifling in the barrel, so it'd give it a straight flight trajectory. Now, with this battle being late in the Civil War, this battlefield saw some of the first metallic cartridges that was brought to market. And so what we're looking here is the Sharps and Hankins carbines. They also had a Burnside. You can see some of the metal cartridge still on this one here. And they were rimfire, much like a .22 rifle, but they wouldn't used exclusively in here. I mean, but for the most part, everything that was being fired were just your standard muzzleloader, like there, where you had to stand up and cram the bullet down the barrel. I think mainly some of the cavalry troops might have had the luxury of using those. Now, some people think a mini ball is this right here, and it's actually just a lead ball. They didn't use that too much in the Civil War. Very little of this was actually used. That's really more 1700s and prior to the mini ball being developed by Manet. He was the French inventor who actually made this particular cartridge, and that's why it's called a mini ball. It's named after him. So let's move on down to the far right, and this is what the Confederates used. The 2 on the left are called Selma Arsenal, and they're close to 58 caliber. And you'll see the one that's got a hole in the top, that's not a hollow point. That's actually where it misfired, and they had to take a worm attachment, run it down the barrel, and thread it into the bullet to pull it out. That was the only way you could clear the misfire. Now, on the far right, this is called a Pritchett Infield, and some of those I've seen really longer than this. And so this is pretty much what the Confederates used. Now, they would use captured Union ammunition too if they could get a hold of it, and quite often did capture a lot of Union ammunition, so they would use it. But for the most part, if they couldn't capture what was the Union had either left behind, or they just simply raided their camps and seized, they would use this right here. A lot of this was hand molded, like on the Pritchett Infield, and the Selma Arsenal got its name from Selma, Alabama. And so you can tell the ring difference on like this versus that right there. It's really got a smaller ring compared to the Union one there, so it's kind of easier to tell. Plus, it's more of a round-nosed bullet than the 58 caliber over here. And so they really poured it on this hill. They did. I mean, for 13 days and 13 nights, I mean, these bullets flew in here by the thousands. It was just raining lead. And these things are really heavy, too. And they were also deadly. They really were. I mean, they had probably an effective range of 100 yards, a really good effective range of 100 yards, and they could be deadly out past that. And they were relatively accurate because of the rifled barrels, and that's why there were so many casualties during the Civil War. There was really a lot of people that got killed as a result of this. And so, basically, that's the bullets that you had here. Now, there were others too, but I figured I would just put out a sampling of what you would expect to find in this particular neighborhood. Now, if you go out walking around on a rainy day, it's possible you could find some of these laying on top of the ground, and they'll be like up on a little pedestal.
And so, but they're going to be white in color like you see. So I hope you found this pretty entertaining and informative as well. And also subscribe to this channel because it's there to be informative, and also it's focused to the issues we have here in South Alabama. Take care, guys, and thanks for watching again.